Welcome, everybody. This is Tommy Ruke from Fort Myers, Florida, doing the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation, TRS, monthly informational webinar. These webinars happen the second Thursday of each month at 2 p.m. These webinars are not filed for state CE credit. The foundation does provide webinars qualifying for state CE. We're doing 12 hours of CE each year in 3 different blocks. Those are presented the first and third Thursday of each month. We have an ethics class going on now, and all 4 hours of ethics class will be repeated next Friday. If you all need information concerning the ethics, 4 hours ethics class that we have done, you may contact our office on those standpoints. If you are seeking those CE credits, then contact our office. If you have any questions during this presentation, please type them in the chat window to the right of your program. We'll answer them as time allows, and if we do not have sufficient time, we will send you emails afterwards and share those answers with everybody if the emails of the questions of a generic source that everybody will benefit. If for some reason you have audio or other problems during this presentation, please type in the chat window if you still have the presentation in front of you, any questions you might have. And for if you do not, call our office at 800-741-4084, and we'll attempt to create the problems. Today I've asked Rich Grimm, who has been a long-term supporter of our program and one of the key people who have made this successful, to lead this seminar. And so with no further ado, Rich, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruke. I appreciate this opportunity. It's been my pleasure to know Gary Rivell for what now may be 4 years. Gary is a Vice President of Insurance Services. He is in charge of developing and managing the tactical relationships within the insurance space for CargoNet. He's a veteran of the property casualty insurance industry with over 35 years of experience in leadership positions with national insurance carriers. In addition, he served on boards for the Illinois Fair Plan, the Commercial Auto Insurance Plan, and the NCCI. He's been a guest speaker at numerous industry conferences, including the most recent MCIEF annual event. Gary received his degree in business administration from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, has earned his CIC insurance designation. Now, Tommy and I had our first comprehensive presentation on CargoNet at an advanced topics truck insurance program in the fall of 2010. At that time, one of Gary's cohorts, a theft investigation specialist that's still a part of their team, he gave us an intro to what was possibly still upstart in some people's eyes, but it has truly become a valued and respected participant the CargoNet program has in the insurance industry, and our ongoing battle against theft. You know, I know of recoveries. He's going to talk about some today, recoveries that are real, and we've seen some real value in what this brings to all parties in a property casualty cargo risk experience. Any tool that can help us defend, attack the losses that we are seeing in this industry, you know, they need to be considered. They have merit, and CargoNet is one that's really demonstrated success and value when it's being utilized. So it's my pleasure today that we're going to have you involved in being able to listen and participate in this presentation and learning what it can, how you, your customers, you as an agent, maybe you're a trucker, a motor carrier that's on, or even an insurance carrier today, how can you benefit? Now, the title of the presentation reflects a little bit of what the whole Tommy Ruke philosophy is, that we have a lot of motor carriers that are not big fleets. And you hear Tommy advocating how, the mom and pop trucker, these are our bread and butter accounts. This is what is important to a lot of insurance companies, a lot of the agencies. And so I ask that as you listen today, to make sure that you're listening and you capture some key information about how you can share this with all your customers, regardless of their size, small and large. Help them to understand that regardless of who they are as a fleet, fleet count, or even the value of the cargo stolen, this CargoNet solution has a lot of value to the bottom line, to the marketing position of a carrier, and in their insurance risk evaluation as you as an agent are trying to present them to an underwriter. You're going to hear Gary say that CargoNet's value is inversely proportionate to the number of power units. So make note of that. Listen for that. See how that concept applies during this presentation. There is a chat box, as Tommy said, where you can submit questions or if you want something clarified or repeated. And some of you may have real-world examples that you're going to want to interject on where you've seen success. And please share those. If we don't get to them during the presentation, we can follow up as needed afterwards. So, you know, webinars sometimes get a little boring, so feel free to insert your own drum rolls and your own applause as you desire. And with that, a little drum roll at your desk for the man of the hour, that legendary Gary Rivell. Gary?
Thanks, Rich. I'm not sure how to respond to that other than to say thank you. Also, I want to thank Tommy for his invitation and also for Beth for the assistance that she provided in getting this thing set up. Before I start the slide thing, I just want to kind of fall back on, as Rich mentioned, CargoNet is coming up on its 5th anniversary at the end of this year. We began in January 2010. So I think you'll be fairly impressed with some of the progress that we've made, especially when you consider that we only had one recovery in the first year and where we are today. But let me start with one of the things that I see as a key element of the whole discussion about CargoNet, and that is education of exactly what it is that we do or don't do. And I usually start out by referring to the simplistic statement of we do not replicate, CargoNet does not replicate what Claims does, what SIU does, nor are we boots on the ground. Typically when I have a small audience, I'll ask if they've heard anything about CargoNet, and you hear a little bit, and I'll follow that with the question of what it is that you think we do. And the responses normally are touching on some type of claims operation, maybe a TPA, or you support SIU, you hire private investigators. So what I want to do is start out with a clean slate. We don't do any of that. We don't, as I say, replicate Claims SIU. And the truth is that we actually do things that insurance companies don't do. That's by design. And they can't do also by design. They were not structured to do anything beside insurance. And as we go through this, you'll see a little bit more about why I say that. First of all, CargoNet's success, okay, sorry, a little delay in the tapping there. Okay, our whole success centers around a national database that's used to provide information sharing of for between theft victims, their business partners. But again, the center of our attention really is law enforcement. If you ask law enforcement, they will tell you that CargoNet has become the single best resource for data associated with cargo theft. And I'll give you a couple reasons why. Number one, historically, in law enforcement space, all information associated with property loss was entered into the National Crime Information Center, known as MCIEF. The problem with that database is really, there are three major issues. One is it's old. It's not the easiest one to navigate through. Secondly, because of the budget cuts around the country with municipalities and particularly with law enforcement, they don't have the resources today to put the information in on a timely basis, and in a lot of cases they're not putting all the information in. The other problem with this particular database is that anything that's in it associated with a property loss will be deleted within 1 year. And we also have another problem associated with MCIEF as it relates to the first statement about delays in getting the information in there. If a law enforcement agent pulls over a known stolen vehicle, and if they run the VIN number in the MCIEF database and it's not there, they have to let it go as a protocol. There's nothing legal about that, but as a general protocol, law enforcement will let them go if it's not in there. And you'll see in the case study that we'll get to in a minute how we actually facilitate and support law enforcement even in something as simple as that. This is a picture. They say it's worth 1,000 words, but here you can see on the outer circle three major components of what makes up this whole issue: the logistics area, the insurance area, and the manufacturing. Moving toward the center are all the different things that we do to support law enforcement, from teaching them theft techniques, because when they go through training, that's not on the syllabus of things that are covered. And Keith Lewis, who's head of our command center that operates 24/7, actually goes out and will train them on some of the nuances associated with investigating cargo theft. We do analytics for law enforcement, and we also do it for U.S. Attorney Generals when they have a case involved. We had one not too long ago. There were 9 individuals involved. We ran all 9 names through our database, and which has only been up and running 5 years. But we found over 86 cases that those 9 people were identified as people of interest in various cargo thefts. And that's one of the other aspects of the database, why law enforcement likes it. Not only the things I already mentioned, but within our own database, we have a separate location for law enforcement so that they can enter those kinds of things, such as Gary Rivell or Rich Bren are people of interest in this case. And that was what gives us the ability then to come back and assist in those kinds of legal pursuits. By the way, the people involved in that got something like 20 years because of the longevity of which they had been doing it, which was easily proven, and they now are serving time. This is a $12.5 million cell phone theft case that occurred October of 2013, and it probably embraces a lot of the things that makes CargoNet run and run well, and it also illustrates the point of you don't have to be a big trucking company to carry a highly valuable load such as $12.5 million. So let's take a look a little bit. In the 26 hours that this unfolded from the time that the report first came in, you have a command center who was operating 24/7. We were interacting with 3 local law enforcement agencies, 3 state law enforcement agencies, 1 task force where it all began, 2 federal law enforcement agencies, and we had a full recovery, or nearly a full recovery, in under 26 hours. All but 6 of the 25,000 phones were actually recovered. But let me also give you a couple examples of what I meant in the earlier slide when I talked about the centralized database. The freight broker involved in this chain of events had called in a private investigator who called the local law enforcement that he knew, which was on the West Coast. This began outside of Chicago, and they said that's out of our jurisdiction. They recommend calling Steve Covey, who's head of the Illinois State Police Task Force, which he did. And he was immediately advised that he needs to take whatever information he has and send it to CargoNet. At the same time, I mentioned having the VIN numbers in MCIEF, that law enforcement will not be able to do anything if it's not there. So after a few hours into this, we have the capability of looking at the MCIEF report, but we do not have the ability to make any entries. But what we discovered was that nothing had been put in there. So we actually spent 3 hours contacting the 2 original law enforcement agencies that investigated it to make sure that they got that in the system, so that if we were successful with recovery, it wasn't going to hold anything up. We also had available, within 4 hours of when the theft was reported to us, all 25,000 serial numbers from the phones that were on board by reaching out to the shipper. And in this case, the story was good because the member insurance company that was involved in this actually got the information to us within less than 24 hours, though we had the initial report in less than 2 hours. And how does something like that happen? The beauty is that in this story, the trucker involved who had the load was not a CargoNet member, had a $2,500 deductible waiver. The primary insurer was not a CargoNet member. Their exposure was $100,000, plus they had the APD on the tractor and trailer. And one of the things I should point out in terms of the added value of the CargoNet membership, while we all focus on the cargo, the reality is that if we get the information on a timely basis, then what we're really looking for at that point is the conveyance that's being used. And so if that's a hidden benefit, we charge insurance companies, for example, based on their cargo premium. But if they happen to be also insuring the APD, that's a hidden benefit to them because that's where we start. At the same time, it's also a benefit to the smaller trucker who may not have purchased rental reimbursement. So the theory is that you can get the conveyance back a little bit sooner. You may or may not get the cargo, but he's much happier rather than going because he didn't buy rental reimbursement, or maybe because of the thin budgets or margins that they have. Maybe they drop the comp and collision coverage, so they have nothing. And again, previous remark about the inverse benefit to the small guy. You take a small guy with 4 trucks and he loses 1, doesn't have rental reimbursement, he's out 25% of his revenue capabilities right then and there. If he has comp, he's probably going to wait the 30 days before it gets settled. And if he doesn't have any comprehensive, he's really in a pickle at that point. So that's one of the hidden benefits, if you will. The excess insurer was a CargoNet member. Their exposure was $400,000, and the shipper, who was also a CargoNet member, had an exposure of $12 million. And as I said before, we had 6 actual phones lost. It's believed that they were taken at the original truck stop, where you probably had several from the same gang, some taking the phones, going ahead, and showing the people that they were talking to what the product was that was actually coming. Taking a look at the issue of small, the trucker involved in this his size was 8 power units. That's all the bigger he was. But if you take a look at the breakdown in terms of this is not just for big truckers, this is how our scenario, our membership breaks down from the trucking class and the carrier class. 2% on owner-operators, 40% of our members are small truckers under 25 million gross revenue, 43% medium, 25 to 500, and 15% are large truckers. But I should also point out one other aspect, and that is that within the membership, anyone in the supply chain, from manufacturer to freight broker to trucker to retail, can be a member. And I will give you, for examples, not to try to impress anyone with respect to the size of these members, but to impress upon you the fact that they have a lot of resources, many more resources than your small truckers do, excuse me, and yet they understand what the advantages are, and most of it centers on the relationships that we have with law enforcement and the network that we've built, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But when you take a look, insurance brokers, excuse me, insurance brokers are about 6% of our members, insurance companies about 8%, freight brokers around 58%, shippers 6%, and truckers and carriers are around 22%. So again, it's all over the map relative to the size of these, and we actually have one company that's an insurance company that's a startup, and we also have some of the biggest ones that are members as well. This goes back to the statement that Rich made, the CargoNet value is inversely proportionate to the number of power units, which is so very true. I mentioned before that we don't replicate what claims SIU does, and we're not boots on the ground. We rely entirely on the thing, but on the database. But there are 3 things that we've seen now over the last 5 years as we take a look at case studies that are always predominant in all 3 being evident in some of the best success stories, such as the one that we just shared. One is membership throughout the supply chain. Again, in that last one, you had the shipper, you had the excess carrier. They were in the supply chain, but they were CargoNet members. And one of the things to keep in mind is that if you ask yourself the question, then who is CargoNet's client in that last scenario? And the answer is, at the time a theft occurs, everyone who is a victim of theft becomes our client in our efforts to try to get that conveyance back and recover the cargo. We do not care if we're talking to a member or a non-member. That is irrelevant. We do not care what the size is, also irrelevant. Our whole objective is the recovery of the conveyance and the cargo. So that's you know, a big aspect of this. Membership, as you already saw, can be throughout the supply chain. The things that I promote with insurance companies to try to incentivize prompt reporting. And I'll say this, sometimes we know we've got data that shows the amount of time between the theft and when it gets reported to the insurance company, and then the number of days from that day, that point until it gets reported to CargoNet. The insurance companies who are most engaged with this have the best results. We have seen some. We also know that sometimes the broker puts out that they want to be contacted if there is a loss. That just delays the process. So in the first notice of loss process, that moves CargoNet up only as good as the time when the insurance company first finds out about it, when they call that after hours. But if they have a TPA or if they're recalling the broker, it may not get sent to the insurance company right away, and it's just a delay, and that is crucial. 48 hours is the primary window of the highest expectation of probability of getting a recovery. The thing that moves us up even further in the timeline and truthfully bypasses the insurance company and bypasses the broker is a deductible waiver that we promote with the insurance carriers with 3 qualifying criteria. First, that it has to be reported to law enforcement within 1 hour and to CargoNet within 1 hour. And if they choose, they can add that if the cargo exceeds a certain value, it's their choice, that there must be some kind of tracking device. So those are the criteria. We also reference and make a strong case for having a split arrangement on the deductible so that you have one amount, say $1,000 for non-members, and you have a $2,500 deductible waiver for CargoNet members. And that's another incentive for them to kind of think of twice or promote, go back and take a look at what are the values of membership and think about possibly joining. And again, it all goes back to the more people we have out there who are, the greater the likelihood that we will get that information. And we can see that just on the number of cases that are reported to us each year. It keeps growing. And a lot of that comes from the members. It comes from the insurance companies. It also will come from law enforcement. When we sign up, we currently have, when we started out in 2010, at the end of the year, we probably had only one capability of issuing an alert. We only had a few insurance companies, and we only had 8 strategic alliances with enforcement. Those are centered in the that you are well aware of where they have historical problems. Today we have the 6 abilities that are listed there, and let's critical read the risk fusion, pre-pass, NIEF. The NIEF and the EPIC, as well as the risk, are federal agencies that have the fusion center risks, 6 fusion centers around the country. Pre-pass for way stations, when we issue the law enforcement alert, it goes directly to the parent company of pre-pass. They get it out to all the way stations. They put it in the system. And if that particular conveyance is coming through, it's going to be pulled over. If they get a red light and blow it, they'll phone ahead and get it stopped down the road. The EPIC is the El Paso Information Center. That is the database for Customs and Border Patrol, and they now receive our alerts. NIEF is kind of interesting. If you remember, after the 9/11 incident and the report, the inabilities that law enforcement had communicating with one another, both horizontally as well as vertically. What this does is it will take a federal agency and give them the ability to go directly into, and I'll use CargoNet as an example, directly into the CargoNet system by merely clicking on an icon that they call I'm trying to think what they have a nickname for it, but it's an icon. And it bypasses the problem of having to back out of their system and then come through our system with password and ID and everything else. So it's, and by the way, it is a one-way street with CargoNet. We do not go into their systems at all. But that's just how far we've come in those 5 years. One of the other things that we'll do for member insurance companies, we'll do it for member insurance brokers and insurance agents if they are a CargoNet Strategic Alliance partner, for which there's no cost. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that, long after this presentation. But it's important that the people who are talking to, if you're a wholesale broker, you're talking to retail brokers. If you're a retail broker, you're talking to your clients. And if the insurance companies are ever out there, such as loss control, talking to their policyholders, it's important that they have some fundamental understanding of what CargoNet does, and that's one of the things that we'll do to create that awareness and familiarization. We'll also, for the retail brokers or wholesale, their distribution channel being the retail brokers, we'll do webinars in turn for them, and if any of the brokers want to do a webinar for their clients and or their prospects, we'd be more than happy to do that. I have a counterpart who focuses on the supply chain space, and we would bring him in because he understands their pain points a lot better than I do. One of the questions, I think that whether your approach is risk management or if you're an underwriter and you're trying to make an assessment, I would ask the simple question, what's your plan pre and post theft event? And more times than not, it's something that they probably haven't thought through in terms of what they're actually going to do. And it tries to set you apart relative to, and by the way, one of the things I will quickly tell you is that I don't think a trucker who is a CargoNet member is necessarily going to get a discount on his insurance, at least a cargo standpoint. And I understand the business well enough, and there's just too much capacity in the market right now. So the best hope really is to avoid increases when they come because they are a CargoNet member and they understand. So when we take a look at their membership for a trucker, if you are a CargoNet member as an insurance company or as an agent or broker under the Strategic Alliance, then your clients and policyholders would be entitled to preferred pricing. And I use that word because it's not a specific discount, because as you get up in size for the truckers, we'll ask questions in terms of what safety measures and mitigation members they already have in place to determine that final pricing. The other thing I would tell you, because I'm always asked this, are we asking you to sell this? No. Are we asking you to be familiar and bring it up? Yes. I also think that that betters you in terms of what your competition is doing and being much more aware of what's out there to help your clients and your policyholders with the mitigation issue. So what is it? What benefits are there for your policyholder or clients? First and foremost, 24/7 command center. CargoNet member can call anytime. And one of the key things that we do, and this can happen whether it's a driver acting out against the trucking company or a trucking company acting out against a freight broker, and that is they hold the load hostage. If you call the police on that, they're not going to respond because they consider it a civil matter and they're not going to get involved unless conversion of that has actually taken place. Then it becomes a theft. So if there's a CargoNet member involved, that is one of the things that we will intercede and try to negotiate a resolution that's satisfactory to everybody. And that is becoming a problem. The other big problem, of course, is identity theft. Where we deviate, we have law enforcement alerts. They get everything that there is about the victim. We also send the alerts out to other CargoNet members, but it's scrubbed. And that's a form of brand protection, which we agreed to with the two major trucking companies when we did the due diligence 6 or 7 years ago. In that case, if it comes to our attention that the ABC Trucking Company has been hit with identity theft, we will call the ABC Trucking Company and ask their permission to release the specifics about who they are and so forth. It doesn't do any good to describe the color of their tractors and trailers. That you know, it's really, and here you saw the number of freight brokers that we have. That's probably our biggest thing, and they're the ones that are going to get hit with this, although, and I truly don't know the nuances of who ends up paying for this, but they're the ones that have the problem because somebody comes in, there's identity theft, and they give a load up. What we'll do is reveal all that. We will broadcast that to all members. We will broadcast it to all the associations that we have, such as the TIA, so that they're aware. And we have numerous feedback from many of them who have talked about, and the key here too is we can pump all kinds of information to your client, your policyholder, but if they don't pay attention to it, read it, and they don't respond to it appropriately, then it doesn't do any good. But we've had numerous cases from freight brokers who have read that, and they will pick it up. And we actually had 2 freight brokers call us, and they had been hit with attempts by 3 different companies that had been recently hit with identity theft. So again, that's another value to your client. One of the new things that we've just come out with, and this we consider this a marketing piece for insurance companies as well as for insurance agents and brokers. What this does is it gives you a quick snapshot of what happened the prior week relative to thefts, or was it a fictitious pickup, as you'll see on the next to the bottom there, the location, what state, and the type of commodity. There's no more detail about that, but if you're an actual member, here's what we have for you in our web portal. You can go in and get access to a lot of this, all this information actually, as a CargoNet member. Quarterly theft reports as well as the annual report, the weekly incident reports, which gives you a lot more detail than the snapshot. But let me just kind of walk through some of the highlights of which ones are fun. I think I will go through this. Okay, here we go. That went. One of the simplest things, I mentioned the database, and because we're owned by ISO, a lot of people think we've got information that actuaries would want, and the truth is we don't. That database was entirely created with law enforcement and the needs that they've got. It was not created for the purpose of rate making and gathering information along that line. And this is important to remember. If you have, for one of 2 reasons, sometimes geographically you may be hours away from law enforcement based on where your truck stop is, if it's after hours. Or you may have a situation because of a priority. Property has the lowest priority of any law enforcement agency. There may be an accident with injuries, and that elevates the priority, and they may tell you, if you were a victim at a truck stop and they call, and they tell you that if there's an accident, there are injuries, we're not going to be able to get out there for 2 or 3 hours. That's fine. All that the person then has to do is call us afterwards, tell them, I reported to law enforcement, give us the name. We will not, CargoNet will not issue a law enforcement alert unless we have confirmation that it has indeed been reported. So in that case, if they're just able to give us who they had called, we'll turn right around and call them, and once it's confirmed, then we will go into action. And I go back to my earlier statement about initially we're looking for the conveyance, and that's what this tip card does. And it tells you the primary information that we're going to need to get the alert out to law enforcement. And you can just see it. This can also be co-branded if you want, whether it's an insurance company. If you're an insurance agent or broker that specializes in this, we can co-brand it. It's not that expensive, but it is critical relative to the information that we're going to need. And by the way, if they don't have that, the driver doesn't know, who's your dispatcher. We'll work our way right up the chain, our command center will, until we get all the information and get it out as quickly as we can. One of the other things, you saw the snapshot report. This is the weekly incident report. It provides a little bit of insight, as it indicates there, and it gives you a couple highlights of news items. This one happens to be C.H. Robinson joins. And then when you open it up, if you're not a member, you can't go any further unless you are, because you have to enter a code in there. But if you are, number one, you will also see this in the weekly report. But if you want more details about it, and if you have a trucker that is themselves engaged in risk management, that's the kind of thing they might want to see to try to make some judgment about, are there things we can be doing from a risk management standpoint to further protect ourselves. One of the other things is truck stop. What we do is, on a monthly basis, we issue the truck stop report. It's actually a rolling report of 24 months, and it gives name, rank, and serial number relative to where these are occurring. You can sort it by state. You can sort it any number of ways. It's on an Excel spreadsheet format. And again, if you're trying to mitigate risk and you see that there's a lot on the lane that your company travels a lot, you can instruct your drivers to try not to stop or to avoid these particular truck stops before, after, or even if you have to get off the highway and find a local diner as a way of doing that. The bad guys are not stupid. In time, if this happens to be particularly effective, or it just becomes well known among the truckers and they start going to, they'll move their operation. It's not extensive to do. They'll move it, but in the meantime, you can make the best effort to mitigate. The other thing that we also have available is online training in terms of best practices. This one represents what's a secure yard, access control and measures that's available. One of the new things, we just entered into a partnership with LoJack SCI. And it's a very interesting because the price of tracking devices is coming down, and they actually have developed a throwaway, a disposable tracking device for these purposes. This is a particularly good item, both for a trucker, but I'll show you in a minute why it's also good for freight brokers if they're trying to judge the effectiveness of the truckers that they're hiring and the utilization of this program. But again, this is really designed more for situations where they aren't owned, they don't have any owned assets, and it completely eliminates the need for reverse logistics. But here's the kind of report that they can get on the truckers who haul for them. If you take a look just at the first one, you'll see Western Express. It was a flatbed. The origin was El Paso heading to Norwich, Connecticut. I don't know how long that takes to drive a flatbed with a full load. I know not too long ago, several years ago, I bought a motorcycle in Vegas and drove it back. It only took 5 days. But you can see here it was 6 days, and then in the extreme right column, you'll see that 4 days was spent in the somebody's yard in Nashville, Tennessee. So if the shippers and the freight brokers are looking for the effectiveness of a trucker and they use this method, they can. The thing that they recommend, and that we certainly would recommend, is to put this device at the front of the trailer. And if you have a few extra dollars, you can put a dummy device at the back door so that if they open it, they see the dummy device, take it, they think they're free, and they go. This is not your typical GPS. It's a pinging situation, and you can set the ping for the frequency, and you can set the ping for a big enough gap between frequency that would actually cover a cross-country trip going from coast to coast. And again, it's it's something that we've entered into. We're already engaged with a number of freight brokers, taking a serious look. We've had 2 customers already that have signed up for this. And again, this is going to, like everything else, like flat screen TVs, how the prices come down, the same thing's going to happen with this technology as well. That's my contact information. Let me go back and talk a little bit. As I said, with the insurance companies, we don't consider them clients. We consider them members. To differentiate why I said, a member is anybody in the chain of events when a theft occurs, because we are, so to speak, totally neutral and our sole focus is get the information and you get it to the right people at the right time, and that's law enforcement. And I think that I showed you evidence of where we are with law enforcement, and I would be very complimentary if they, especially if the ones who have interacted with us. We also have a program called a Strategic Alliance Partnership with insurance agents or insurance broker. There is no cost because you do not bear any of the risk. But what we ask is that if you want to become a member, A, you can utilize our logo on your printed materials or communications. We do ask and reserve the right to see anything when you actually draft something that has references to CargoNet, but other than that, it's just a quick look-see. If it's something that you've cut and pasted from one of our brochures, it'll get a quick approval, but we do reserve that right. And then we would love to be able to then do a webinar for your folks so that your salespeople can talk to them about membership. At the same time, you would then be getting those snapshots. Those can be sent out on a weekly. We send them out on a weekly basis. If you want to do it monthly, that's fine. But it demonstrates to your policyholder and clients that you're committed to working this area to bring risk mitigation to them and alternative ways of risk mitigation beyond what they may already have thus far. We also do a special quarterly for members on the annual statement. It's what I call the Cliff Notes version. I may be dating myself, but it's very abbreviated rather than go through all the details in terms of the significant changes that we see occurring, and they do occur, especially when commodity prices start to change. You see the impact of that. And again,
Gary, let me ask you this, because this is relevant, because the great number of people in our audience are both wholesalers and retail agents involved in this area. And what you just said is that these agents, these retail agents who are dealing with the insured can be involved in helping the insured become a part of this by signing up and helping you approach those people. Is that what you're saying here?
That is right. And not only that, but if you are one of the strategic partners as an agent or a broker, and you bring us one of your clients who becomes a broker, they then are entitled to preferred pricing.
Okay, two things about that. Give me an idea. A great number of these risks, as Rich started with, and as you and I talked earlier on, are smaller motor carriers. And I think this is important because it's very difficult to avoid crashes, but there's a lot of things that can be done to avoid theft and to avoid and to assist recovery. And as these items our insurers are hauling, some by smaller motor carriers, and the value of the items they're hauling we don't know about in a lot of cases, they need this assistance. And you mentioned two things here that if I'm an agent I would want to think about. First off, to use the relationship that the motor carrier might have with you to negotiate some waiver of subrogations or some other kind of a preferred pricing on the cargo policy. I know you can't guarantee that, and I know all insurance carriers will not allow that, but at least there's some idea that they are trying to take care of these things, particularly if losses happen. This is one way that they maybe could mitigate these future losses by going to a carrier and says, yes, we've had losses, but here's what we've done to help them. I know you can't talk pricing, I don't want to talk too much pricing. Can you give me a parameter, if I had 15 trucks, roughly what the cost would be?
It's not my space, but let's see, 15?
That's roughly. I mean, obviously every situation would be different, both locations and what they're hauling and the value of cargo and things like that, just so we get some idea of what they're dealing with this.
Yeah, our pricing is based, with the real small, under 10 and under, we do it by power units.
Okay.
And if you figure $50 a power unit, that's on the high side. So even if you had 10, you're looking at $500 a year.
$500 a year, okay. So that might be something, particularly with the hauling things, that $500 a year might be something that an agent in dealing with the insurance provider might be able to negotiate that much out. Is that what you're seeing happening in some cases?
I can tell you this, that we're very open to anything that anyone wants to bring us, but we actually had one insurance company who called, and it was a very competitive situation, a much larger account. Noise there, inquiring as to what the cost of that membership would be, which we gave them, and they were actually willing to put it in their proposal that as an added benefit to our price, we're going to throw in CargoNet membership, and the insurance company would pay for it. It was a sizable account. I mean, you know, that's.
I just want to interject too. You know, to his point there. So that $500 investment, whatever that investment is, even if there's not a deductible reimbursement offset by the motor carrier, in essence, if the CargoNet team helps to get back that tractor or that trailer, you know, they've saved themselves a deductible, right? So because they've recovered it. So there's a lot of value. I like the breakdown, Gary, that you shared today about, you know, what happens, you know, when a 4-unit trucker loses a truck. You're right. He just lost 25% of his ability to go out there and generate revenue. To pick up on Tommy's point, so we've got somebody that's interested, you know, in what do we do? And I will just lean back on a scenario that we had in the last 18 months where it is a small, very small motor carrier, but doing some very high specialized pharmaceutical hauls. And so we're looking at $2 million plus on the exposure, and that was one of the elements that I presented to the underwriter. Would this be acceptable, more acceptable to you? You know, and it wasn't even about pricing. Would this be more acceptable to you with CargoNet? So I referred him into Gary. I believe that a connection was made. You know, how do they do that, Gary? What do they need to share? How do they connect to get something going with between a motor carrier and you?
Yeah, and I make no pretense about it. I immediately refer to my counterpart in that space because he knows the pricing. He knows what the guidelines are. But let me quickly say this because of a couple comments that were made. Number one, if a trucker submits, or wants to become a CargoNet member, we don't really give a rip what he carries.
Rich, you got something going on back there.
Okay.
What he carries is not the basis of our pricing. It's based on gross revenue. Or unless you're real small, then we go to power units if it's under 10. So it's not an issue, but the ultimate price may be predicated on what kind of mitigation efforts do you already have in place. Do you consistently have a tracking device in loads over a certain dollar amount, that kind of thing? And I think that's one of the questions that underwriters should be asking, to be quite honest, to try to gauge it. And that's why I go back. I think that the margins for insurance companies are so thin on the cargo right now because of the excess capacity that I don't think you're going to get pricing reductions so much as more favorable reception and possibly the avoidance or the reduction of a price increase down the road as a CargoNet member. And especially, you go back to the $12 million heist, the trucker, his deductible was $25. He had to shell out $2,400 on 8 trucks. He would have been probably paid $2,500. Probably would have covered him for 2 years. The cost of membership.
I could also see it where the insured, the trucker, could take this to their customers and saying, we're part of this to give the customer a better comfort level of doing business with them, particularly with their high theft items or marginally theft items. That would be something that a trucker could use as a sales pitch.
Well, let me share 2 things. Number one, I have talked to underwriters who actually have said in the comments section, it's being volunteered. I'm a CargoNet member. The flip side of that is we also know a couple shippers, manufacturers, who in the request for a price is actually asking the question, are you a CargoNet member? Now, what they're actually doing with that behind the scenes, are they allowing that person to wait until the $20,000 value shipment of styrofoam cups comes along, or are they going to give that, you know, $500,000 shipment to that driver, or find the guy that's a CargoNet member? Those kinds of things we know are happening.
Well, again, anything that can help our insureds be better insureds by protecting the cargo, recovering the cargo, being more high visibility to the customer, or better things that the retail agent can bring to the insured is what our whole purpose of the foundation is. And to that end, I'm just going to thank Gary and Rich for putting all this together, reminding you who are on the line, if you have any questions later or want to contact Gary, contact our office and we can help you walk through these kind of things. Our next webinar, will you flip one more page for me? Well, we're going to move it until January the 15th. When we looked at the second Thursday of next month, that is January the 8th. That's still in football season and other things there, so, and a lot of people are still off of that, so we're going to put it to the third Thursday of next month, if you would look at that part of it on January 15th, and we'll announce what that webinar will be, the title of that webinar to be. With that said, guys, I thank you. You want to say any last word, Rich or Gary, and then we'll hang it up.
No, I very much appreciate everybody who called in, and again, my appreciation to the MCIEF staff for putting this together and giving us this opportunity.
All right, Rich, you're done.
And I'll just make one last. I'll make one last plug that you know, again, I've seen it at work. I encourage any agents. It's a great way as a differentiator to you to help your customer. You know, not only to improve their risk profile, as you heard Gary say, but you know, this can maybe differentiate that smaller carrier to be able to compete against some of the larger ones. So please give it a consideration.
If I could just echo something along that line, because most of my background, you know, is more on the sales marketing slant, and I know a lot of that stuff that comes out of insurance companies and anywhere really is kind of fluffy about differentiating, but CargoNet is sincerely a meaningful differentiator.
I think so too, and I think the big part of, like anything that starts, even like our foundation, you have gained legs over these years, and now you're far more relevant than when you first started. Being a part of ISO, if you remember, I have been involved with you for 4 or 5 years now, as you all got started in this early on in this area, and as you get bigger and get more legs, you're more beneficial to us all. So I think it's also important that we help support things like this, because it definitely benefits our industry, it definitely benefits our motor carriers, and it should have some ramification on the cost of cargo as we are moving forward, no matter what the market will be. So with that said, we hope you all have a good time. Since this is the holiday period of time, we also wish you a happy Christmas, and next year, 2015, let's all hope and pray it'll be a winter for us all. To that end, we're out of here.